Continue. There we go. So I've been developing this idea for a while called the inheritance share. And unlike in Hyro, I think you're going to have to put yourself on mute because there's background sound. Thank you. So the inheritance share, to me, doesn't stem from, there's a word, progeneration, there's an idea within the English monarchy that the eldest or the first born heir has control or say or rights to all of the inheritance. And that's the way they do it in Britain. Now, in the Islamic world, where we get algebra is by a scholar who developed a system. And he didn't do it with any numbers, but he did it entirely in words. And from where we get algebra, which gives us our computer systems, by the way, it's one of those fundamental building blocks to know how to work with zero in your equations. What this fellow did was create and I'm just going to type in, I know it starts with a K sound or a cough, actually, from the Arabic language. He gave us a system that allows you to divide an inheritance so that there's zero left, so equals zero, but where all the parties involved can walk away feeling that they got their equal share or their fair share of it. And this was part of what came out of Islam, by the way. It was a math that enabled you to divide inheritance in such a way that no one walked away angry and people didn't kill each other over these things. That man's name, inventor of algebra. Musa al-Khwarizmi, yes. Okay, so anyway, so it interprets that, and the inheritance share, as I understand it, would be to say, in a like way that Lewis, when he first heard this in a prior session that we had, Hyro, where Lewis was involved, you take all the land, and I would limit it to the land for people, because like Dominic has said, we're not the only species on the earth. And then you divide it by the number of people, and that would be the inheritance share. All right. So I've been thinking, well, maybe we could call it inheritanceism or inheritance shareism. But then the problem with isms are they're systems of thought, and they are kind of like cages. And but then I thought, well, it's not really about the land itself, really, because Jesus, or not Jesus, when Yahweh, or when God, when it was set forth for ancient Israel, and by the way, remember in the laws, you could never sell the land permanently. It was always in perpetuity for the people, for God's people. That the land was never to be sold in perpetuity, that you'd have this year of Jubilee every 49 years. On the 50th year, I think you'd have this year where all the debts were forgiven and things reset back into a much more simpler state. The land was always conditional, possession and holding of the promised land, because when the people of Israel would no longer follow God's commands, God would allow invaders to come in, Assyrians first, and haul them away out of the land, and then Babylonians again, and then finally Romans in AD 70, destroying that nation, tossing the royal class out into Spain, creating the Sephardi Jews, which someone we later talked about, Spinoza, was a member of, and then Ashkenazi, who were, and that's after prior versions like the 10 lost tribes of Israel going off into being hauled away because, and just leaving the Judah's branch to remain. But even Judah's branch fell down after. But God again has repeated throughout this history for us that possession of the land is always conditional upon the compliance with His commands. His commands, which are basically that which God deems to be just. Because God isn't wanting sacrifices, He's wanting mercy, and also, that's enough. So anyway, so in Jesus's Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 5 is, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." So it's not really about the inheritance share. It's not about the land, but it's rather about being meek. Well, how do you be meek? Oh, then talking with this one author who's written these like 35 books or however many it's been, one of them being "Small is Still Beautiful." It's not something that we can will ourselves into being. Rather, it's the process of the relationship of God in our lives and the lordship of God in us that produces meekness. and then after that comes the land. It's just part of God's promises, like all of His wonderful promises that He's so loyal about maintaining. So that was the big insight.
Did they talk about how the Hebrews or the Abrahamic people, or even the Mosaic people, the people that Moses led out, how they conquered land? Like,
Right, so
was it justifiable by God, or it was because it was there and it was easy to get?
well, that's always the claim, right? But let me describe to you. Well, let's go back to Exodus chapter 32 and 33, when Moses and his was his half brother or his nephew, the one younger than him, Aaron, lead the people of Israel out of Egypt, and they're out in the wilderness. And they come to the holy mountain. Moses goes up into the mountain to commune with God, and God gives him these commandments. But while he's gone up in this place, the people are like talking to Aaron and saying, I wonder, is it Aaron? I have to go back and review the names. And says, Moses has been gone for a while, and we need direction here. So make us a god that we can worship. And Aaron directs them to take all their gold that they had collected from the Egyptians, their earrings and their jewelry, and they take it and they melt it, and they create this golden calf. And Aaron says, "This is your God." And then they all start worshiping it. And then Moses comes and sees this, hears from the angel of the Lord, this is happening, throws down the tablets, and then evil comes out from there. But I want you to remember, Moses wasn't there at the end. I got to go attend to my wife.
Uh-oh.
Will he be back?
I think it's over. We'll have to pick up. I guess we know what we're doing next week.
He left us in suspense. So we will
Yeah.
continue next weekend.
All right.
Thanks.
Don't forget your sunscreen today.
They got SPF 50.
All right. All right. Well,
Thanks for
have a good
joining
time.
us, Mike,
Yeah. Thanks for
on
inviting
the
me.
bike.
And all over. Mike
In
on the
the
beach.
room.
Mike on the bike. Mike in the kitchen. So, all right.
I
Well, you
wrote
have a
on the
good time.
road.
That's right.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day. Bye.
Oh, maybe he'll come back.
¿Quién es esa? ¿Quién es esa?
Una estrella. Uy.
Uy, sí. Excuse me.
Thank you. Long story short,
Oh,
long story short,
¿Cómo se llama?
oh, let me turn.
long story short for the recording purposes. And gotta love Jairo and his mom there. Is that a 9/11/2001 sized event, and there were many less people back in that day, I think, that occurred in that around 3,000 people were killed after all this. And the people who did it were the Levite, or sons of Levi, who became the Levite priestly class, who went out and did the killing. And when I look at
People killed.
yeah, well, yeah, because they had created this idol, and according to the story, I mean, this is later recorded while they're in Babylonian exile. So you got to take all these things, I think, with a grain of salt and really dive as deep as possible, and then explore the different possibilities of what perhaps went down. But as it's described in Exodus chapter 32, 33, 34, and I got to go back to my wife.
I can't hear Rami right now. He's muted. Maybe he's fixing his audio. He'll be right back. I thought it was over, so I told Mike that it looked like it was over, so he did. But I decided to stay in case it wasn't. But hopefully it's being recorded. Yeah, it looks like it's being recorded. But he'll probably be back if he can. I think he'll want to come back. It's a beautiful day. In where are we? ¿En dónde estamos? Ya casi se ve la playa. We're on the way to Cocoa Beach. ¿Qué dice?
Dame 50 centavos.
Cocoa Beach. Vamos a Cocoa Beach.
A Cocoa Beach.
Sí, a la playa.
Thank you. You too, thank you.
Mhm. Let's see. I'm going to check where we're at on the map.
Ay, ¿esto es tuyo?
Sí. Let's see where we're at on the map.
Mira, tú sabes colocarla.
Let's see if I can share screen. Share screen. Oh.
Jairo, aquí está la
No, pero o sea, ábrele el teléfono.
Sí.
Dame aquí, yo te lo pongo acá. Ah, a ver, mira, préstame que sí, yo lo
Screen
pongo.
broadcast.
Ve, yo lo estaba
Ah,
poniendo.
no, pero quítale el
Uy.
desbloqueo, por favor.
Let's see.
¿Sabes qué estaba haciendo yo poniendo el mío para desbloquear?
Can you see where we're at? We were over here in north of Orlando, like way up here in Heathrow.
Ella lo mandó por mensaje, ¿no?
Oh, kind of over here.
Creo que sí. Que yo usaría por el
Yeah,
WhatsApp.
here's home.
Ella mensaje, pero no me
Now
quedé
you know
tan
where to
WhatsApp,
find me.
estaba
And now where are we?
mensaje.
Where are we? Wow. I don't know where we're at. A recent. Oh, there we are. we're on. We're on. We're on 528. 528. Then we're maybe we're gonna go down this way. And there's the beach. Oh wow, man,
La isla
it's incredible.
de Barú.
I think that's where we're gonna head to.
Ah,
Yeah, I think we're gonna head that way. Let's see. Get back over here. Oh,
That was really neat.
yes, I'm back. Stop
Um,
sharing.
eso se llama.
So the
Yes.
event, basically what happened was that, and you really need to read the account and contemplate it, because I've been doing that for months on end. I go back and try to reread, but just comprehending or trying to understand all that went down during that situation. The short ends of the story that I'm going to highlight or note here is that a brother was killing brother, and they were killing people for failing to wait for Moses to give instruction from God. And this was literally an internal religious war, because there were people who were creating idols, and then which is to say, these non-thinking entities, and then worshiping the non-thought. And then there was Moses, who was wrestling with God prior to, in that tradition, that Jacob wrestled with God. And notice in the story, the way Israel, which means wrestles with God, the way Jacob got his name Israel was for literally doing that all night, wrestling with an angel of the Lord to try to get his way. In the process, God blesses Jacob. He gets this title, this name Israel, which becomes the name of his people or his descendants. But he's also hurt in the process, because the angel of the Lord at the end touches his hip and pops the hip out of his socket, and he spends the rest of his life limping. All right, and pain will really make you think and change your attitude. It will define you in a way that is the effect. And that was the exchange and the trade there. And what happened in Exodus 33, I think, or right around there, is that they were going back to the ways of worshiping and creating idols, and those who thought about it made this statement, having those who were willing to come up and do it. And it was sons of Levi who came up and did this. They took swords and they went in and they slaughtered people indiscriminately. In other words, it was like unto themselves, it was like popping out the hip. And this is one of the things that I think psychologically shapes this pain, this moral and mental pain, kind of almost shapes. And I think this is why probably a lot of Jews, this and the later conquest of the land of Canaan, it's actually 6 different peoples that are mentioned, that are listed as occupiers of the promised lands, the ones who cultivate and make nice this area before the refugees out of Egypt, where the sons of Jacob come back into and take it. Before they even do that, 40 years before, they go in and they punish themselves, they kill themselves, part of themselves, for making the mistake. Now, how was the mistake made? The mistake was made under Aaron. And then Moses apparently condoned this. And then after Moses died, it was Aaron's and his descendant who came after him, who goes and leads this group of people who continually make these mistakes of turning to idols, not of their own nation, not the God, not the actual God who who's fully realized and complete, but these man-made idols that men keep on turning to, and that their own people kept on turning to, which kept on causing them to lose possession or occupancy of the land because they were kept on being hauled off as slaves or would be killed in the process of these warring tribal groups that would come in and try to take over the region, this contested area. You had a root question, Jairo, but I'll be right back to hear it again about the conquests. But I guess my only point there was to say that the Jews aren't doing it to others what they haven't already done in their own history to themselves. So let me come back.
So, what have we learned today? We have learned that
No, no, con él. Uy, se olvidó el Tito.
oh,
Se olvidó.
what have we learned today? There's property. Why is there property? Because there's land.
I'm back.
Yes.
Back.
World is a big, big place. And it's full of so many wild and interesting and astonishing features. Nature probably being the most diverse, and man too. And a lot of expressions across so many different spectrums are all happening in a sort of concurrent, but also evolving and moving in dynamic way. So if you need a base, I would say the base is 0. And if you need a God that's a minimal God, but still capable through which the entire known and even unknown existence can spin forth and out of, you can think in terms of the Islamic God, if you so choose, which some Muslims would argue is the same God as the Jews and the Christians, but I'm still sticking with Jesus because he's at least respected as a prophet within Islam. But for me, he defines and he puts flesh on God in a way that allows us to understand and interface and know sort of God's will, starting mercy, not sacrifice, willing to sacrifice himself in order so that others may live and live abundantly, not just in a mediocre way, but in a way that is free and that is true to truth. I see no greater influence on the world than Jesus Christ, and I have no better news to share with anyone than his life and his teachings. And then out of that has come a whole wonderful, I want to say panoply of furtherances of so much of God's action. Now, not all religious action is good, not all theology is good, and not all faith is good. But there is such a thing as a pure and true religion which produces only good. And it's not religion that we worship, but rather it is God that we worship. And the way that I best understand God, and that I encourage others to learn about God through, is through Jesus Christ's life and teachings.
So is Jesus God 2.0?
No, because if you read the Gospel of John, chapter 1, Jesus is described as being there at the beginning of the creation of the universe. So you get the deification of Jesus, which
But
you hear hints of as you read the Gospels. But Jesus. Mhm.
Is that gospel just to validate this new version of God?
Well, in a sort of way, because if you read John chapter 8, verse 44, you hear the people coming up and questioning him and denying his claim. Jesus says that were they sons of God. Or first they say sons of Abraham, and they try to make Abraham an idol, saying that and that they worship the only true God. And he says, no, you're actually sons of the Satan in the Jewish scriptures is used 6 times, and 4 times it's used as a verb, and in its noun form it means simply adversary. And there in an example of how it's used as a verb, there's an example of David Sataning and then describing the people that he was warring against. So it is to say to be adversary to be the adversary to. So in if you got to read the surrounding verses, but Jesus says in John 8:44 that actually you're sons of the adversary, who referring the adversary of God, and that you're not speaking the truth because you're speaking after your father, like philosophical father, this adversary of God, who spoke only in lies and who was the father of lies and of murder. It really is the depth and the tapestry that you'll find when you start reading into and contemplating the words of Christ as found in the Gospels, and the theology that you get from studying not only the 4 Gospels, but also Acts of the Apostles, and which was Luke part 2, because remember, Luke was like a research report to the city of God. Theophilus, that's what the name, when he writes Dear Theophilus, he's writing to the city of God, who could be an individual person, or it could be all people reading. So he writes his account of Jesus' life and ministry on earth. And then the Acts of the Apostles in chapter 1, Jesus is still there, but then he ascends into heaven. And during that first chapter, and Jesus describes that he has to do that in order that he may send the Helper, which is the Holy Spirit, to come and be manifest in the people. So in a way, those who believe and obey his commands are not only his disciples, but they become, from the time of Pentecost forward, which was I think 50 days after Christ's ascension back to be at the right hand of the Father in heaven, by sending the Holy Spirit down to his believers, what his believers in essence become is the third temple of God. And this is why so many people in the earlier faith, who again would look at Christ's followers as a cult, who are disturbing the established order out of their own tradition and beliefs and systems. There's a set of folk who are trying to dismantle Alaska Mosque and Dome of the Rock, and they believe that it's their job to set up a third physical temple and restart the animal sacrifices, and that somehow that's going to bring peace and order to the earth in their minds, and that is their job and what they feel is right to do. But in order to do that, you must first ignore and disregard the idea that actually it's Christ's believers, their living bodies are of the temple, third temple, the Holy of Holies. And so what you see in the 20th century are repeated histories of attempts at destruction, not just denial, but destruction of that physical third temple, which is to say the body of the believers, and replacement with this human-made construct, a third physical temple made of stones, with an altar in which the animal sacrifices can be started back up again.
So the so the revolutionary Jesus of Nazareth, he was questioned about Moses's law of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and things like that. And he responded with, show the other cheek. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
Well, yeah, if someone strikes you, present them with your other cheek. If someone sues you to take your shirt, give them your coat also. If a soldier come and asks you to carry his equipment for a mile, walk with them too. It's always repay evil with good. That's what transforms the world. That's what transformed the Roman Empire. That's what continues to bring heaven on earth. And it comes at sacrifice. It's not cheap. Grace is tremendously expensive. The early New Testament writers were describing themselves as being sheep led to slaughter, because remember, they were for entertainment tossed to wild animals to be devoured. They were crucified. They were tortured, cut, burned in oil, all sorts of different experiences. But in their agape, in their total love, and their expression of God's Spirit, because they remained in Jesus, God's transformative power through their obedience to their master's will, which is to say Jesus giving these commandments: feed my sheep, shepherd my flock. There are all sorts of ways that men can get it wrong. I mean, almost repetitively and continually and farcically. It's ridiculous when you don't study history, how many times the same kind of mistakes just keep coming up and up and up. Which is why it's important to study and know the history, so that we can learn from it, so that we don't repeat and make the same mistakes again and again. Knowing history, knowing the mistakes of our collective humanity's past, allows us to break out of the cycle of them, or at least enables us with the knowledge that exists that don't do that again, at least not in that way. But the real key is to live within the will of God and to exist within it, to not necessarily your own human will, but through, like what Mike said, where you lay your desires down at the feet. Well, you toss them in the trash, or onto the burning pile of garbage, because in the end, whatever will that God has, especially for your life, is way more exciting, way more interesting, way more enriching, way more interesting than anything you're going to be able to come up with on your own, because again, your and my knowledge is incomplete. It's limited by our own all the boundaries that not only that we set upon ourselves, but the fact that we're just not beings that knows and sees and has been around as long as has got it all worked out, because he created it. We're still newbies to existence. And you know what it's like when you're trying to teach someone how to operate a mouse. They have their fingers above here and they're not working it quite right. But someone who's got experience, a master at that domain, knows it and can propel you so much further and so much farther than you'd ever get on your own with that existence. But even just given time, he is the maker, the author, the creator, not only of our existences, but to the degree to which we were able to align to God's perfect will, which when I use the word perfect, I got to be careful here because it's not. I'm not talking human idea or neurosis in terms of trying to achieve some lesser form of perfection. I'm talking about wholeness, about where everything is just right and righteous and working the way it was intended to work, so that we're in peace and in relation with God and in peace and relationship with others and sharing in love, and that's a transformative love that does bring about heaven on earth, not by man's will but by God's will. And it's only by complying with his commands do we actually love God. And what does God call us to do? God calls us to do what anyone would be doing if their conscience, which is pure, which is out to help others and to grow in love, would be doing on its own naturally, if it weren't polluted by all the bad ideas that are so present, prevalent, and constantly being propagated by men throughout the world.
So tell me about the history of land.
Beautiful.
Land, like the land and property. Like, how did property come about? Why
question.
is there property?
Well, most historians say it came about with agriculture, which, by the way, ties right into what Dominic had given reference to earlier today, where these two sons, Cain and Abel, the elder, or the first one out, being one who made his life by way of agriculture, growing grain. And his brother, Abel, he was a shepherd of flocks of sheep. And the right to land, not to be disturbed by the sheep, they both tried to make sacrifices unto God to please God. Like, here, be happy with, look at what I've done with my life. And God seems to favor the shepherd, Abel, who's producing this perfect, or raising or bringing up this lamb